Welcome, everybody, to this week's edition of Deploy Friday, where I, Robert Douglas, get to speak with fascinating people from around the internet about cool internet things. This week, I'm here with my colleague Larry Garfield, who's also on the DevRel team at Platform.sh, and we're going to be talking to three people who know a bit about extending Platform.sh. So we're really talking about the Platform.sh product on this show. So I'm going to quickly introduce our guests before handing it over to Larry, who's going to interrogate them all. But I will, before that, note that in the text section of the YouTube video that you're looking at, you have some interesting links off to resources pertaining to the show. And there are some now, and we'll update it after the show if we mention any other interesting ones. But our guests today are Serhey Dolgushev from Contextual Code. And we love Serhey because he is very active in our Slack channel and has been a customer for a long time, and even has a blog series on the Contextual Code website about extending Platform.sh, which we will put a link to in the comments. Then we have Mathias Lesniak, who is Chief Typo 3 consultant at Pixelant. Hi, Mathias. Mathias has got some really cool stuff that they've used on their sites for analyzing them to optimize them. And the surprise guest for the day is Maria de Anton, who is Gesundheit, is a product manager at Platform.sh. And Maria is going to talk about an exciting new feature that we've just launched today. So we've got a great set of guests today, and I'm going to hand it right over to Larry to start talking about how people extend Platform.sh.
Okay, so as Robert said, we try to make Platform an extensible platform, extensible system, and because we know we can't come up with every idea. We want to enable other people to come up with better ideas than we have. And Serhey, I want to start with you, because for as long as I've been at Platform, you've periodically just dropped into the Slack channel, our public Slack channel, with, hey, I wrote this cool script that does this thing. What do you think? So I'm assuming you have an easy time playing around with Platform. What convinced you that, hey, yes, I should just try scripting other things on top of Platform myself? What made you decide to do that?
So the thing, in our case, we had a few dozens of projects, and we've been hosting them on some other platforms. And we had a look at Platform.sh. It seemed pretty cool for us. And we decided to move all of our projects at once to Platform.sh, which was very brave. And because of that, we faced a few challenges. And we realized that Platform.sh is pretty extendable, so we can fix all of our issues. In some cases, it requires some custom development. And basically, we started to fix all of our challenges we had during our project's migration to Platform.sh. And during that time, we made a few cool things, like, for example, I remember the script we made to migrate a project from one region to another region, because
that was a fun one. Yeah.
Basically, it was just a bunch of bash scripts, but it made that task really much easier and much more pleasant. Because at that time, when we started to migrate our projects, there was no US2 region. So we migrated all the projects to US1 region. And right after we did that, the US2 region was announced. And we had to migrate few dozens of projects. And on some of the projects, we had about 100 environment variables. So doing that manually was a nightmare. Except that I remember a few years ago, there was a limitation for logs. So maximal size for all the logs was like 10 megabytes, I guess. It was increased recently to 100 megabytes.
That was, I think, second half of last year, something like that. Yeah, we found more disk space and decided to let people have it.
Yeah, which makes sense. But in some of our cases, when we had some issues, we needed the logs for last week, for example, on heavy loaded projects. And we came up with the idea to sync the logs to S3. And again, I made a simple bash script, which was running once an hour, and it was appending all the logs to the S3. And that let you to store logs for last weeks or months and have access to them.
Okay. So one thing I noticed, so the region script, to clarify for people not familiar with it, Platform.sh has a number of different regions that can correspond to geographic regions like the US or the EU or Australia, but we also have multiple logical regions in each geographic region. Mostly that comes down to just segmenting projects so that we can operate on a whole set of projects at once for updates and so on. Our original regions in the US and the EU ran an old version of our internal software. The newer version of our internal software runs on everything else and has a lot of newer features. So we've been encouraging users to migrate in their own time from the old region to one of the new regions. And we actually mentioned in our documentation, the best way to do that is Serhey's script. It's actually how I migrated my own site from US1 to US2. One thing I've noticed, Serhey, in most of the scripts you've written, you're mostly wrapping our CLI rather than using the platform REST API directly. Now, the CLI is just a front end to the API itself. Is that because it's there? Is that because you don't like working with the API? Is it because shell scripting is easier than PHP scripting for you? What is the, why do you take the approach you take?
So when I started to use CLI, I don't think the REST API was publicly available. I'm not sure about that. And the main reason why I'm still using the CLI, because it's much easier to wrap a CLI call in a bash script rather than calling the API. And I don't really see any reasons to use PHP scripts for that. Because in that case, you might have some issues with PHP extensions, PHP versions, and so on. So I guess the most simple way to solve tasks like this is just to use a bash script. And that's why I'm using bash. And yeah, wrapping a CLI is very easy. And that's the main reason. And
simplicity.
I need to admit that we still have some projects in old US1 region. And at some point,
going away. If it works for you, we're not turning it off anytime soon.
Yeah, and at one point I thought that a lot of projects will be migrated from US1 region to US2 region. Then if we'll keep a few of our projects in US1 region, it means that there will be less projects on the same grid host, and maybe we'll get more resources just because all the other projects are migrated to US2.
Yeah, I'm not sure it actually works that way, but it's an interesting theory.
We prefer to hope in this theory. And actually, yesterday I was messing with workers on one of our projects. We decided to move some heavy cron jobs to workers. And just to put some context about that, so workers are producing some logs, and we need to access that logs in main app container. And I was messing with, I was trying to use CLI to SSH to a worker instance from app container, but there were some issues. And then I realized that it sounds like a perfect use case for network storage. And it was introduced maybe a year ago. So,
a little over, I think.
Maybe, yeah. And when I was checking the documentation on that, I was very surprised that it's available only in a few regions, in US2 and EU2, I guess, which is fine with us.
Yeah. It's available on everything except the old US1 and US2 regions. It requires some of the features in the new core software. And
Yeah,
upgrading a region in place from the old core software to the new core software, we decided was going to break too much, so we just started giving people new regions.
In that case, so it's worth mentioning that our goal going forward with all of the regions that people are on except US1 is to keep the region parity and everything up to date all the time, and not have backwards compatibility breaking changes. But the big change that happened historically between US1 and US2, which is exactly why you needed that migration script, is hopefully a complete anomaly and will hopefully never happen again unless there's a really, really good reason to start a new generation of regions. But our goal is to keep regional parity.
We've had, I believe, 16 new releases of our core software since then, and you probably haven't noticed, and that's by design.
Yeah. And the one question I would like to bring up again, we discussed about that a lot of times on Slack and so on, but is there, I mean, why the CLI is not pre-installed inside platform.sh?
We talk about that internally a lot, and there's I think there's actually a Jira issue to pack the containers with it installed. There's some trade-offs. That means we'd have to install PHP on the non-PHP runtimes. But that's a small thing to give the convenience of having it there already. There's another group of people in the company who are voting for rewriting it in Go.
I'm in that group, honestly.
But we have to do things one at a time and go slowly to, make sure that everything's smooth. But we take that as a +1 on the feature request for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure, because some time ago, I was talking to Ori from platform.sh about the build caches. For example, on one of our projects, we need to install Moz JPEG utility. And basically, we were doing that in build phase. We were compiling that from sources. But then we discovered, actually, Ori suggested us to use Node.js dependency. And in that case, you don't need to write any custom bash scripts. You don't need to install anything from the sources, and it works much faster. And I'm wondering. Oh, I guess we try to use the CLI dependency on some of the projects, and then there was some conversation on GitHub about that, which was eventually it was not the best approach, right?
Yeah. So some background on that. Our CLI is written in PHP currently, and like any modern PHP project has a bunch of dependencies. And what we distribute is that library compiled into a FAR file, which is a single PHP executable script. And that's what we recommend using, because if you just try to install it as a composer dependency, it'll work, but it also then brings in all of its dependencies as composer dependencies, which then need to be compatible with whatever other dependencies you have. So if you have another PHP dependency that you're installing that has a package that requires a package that conflicts with the version required by the CLI, you can't install both of them, so they'll bump into each other and it won't actually work. By installing it as a FAR file, you get one single file with no external dependencies, and it's not going to bump into anything else you have on the system. So our CLI maintainer, Patrick Dawkins, is firm on it's much better to just use the single file version so that it can't break anything else. It's not going to run into any other or any runtime issues with other libraries you have installed. So he knows what he's talking about. I take his word for it.
But in some cases, I just want to highlight that it's much better to use dependencies. For example, AWS CLI is a good example, because you just add one line to platform.sh config, and that's all. You don't need to run any custom scripts or compiling anything from sources.
Yeah, when a pre-made system like that is available, we will usually recommend that. So our general approach is we want to give you options. So with a PHP library, you can download it yourself like ours. You can put it in your applications composer JSON file, or you can put it in the general PHP dependencies. There's pros and cons to each of them, depending on what it is you're trying to do, whether how you want it installed and so on. And which one is best, that kind of depends on your use case. I have found that for anything that your application cares about, putting it in the applications composer JSON file is going to give you the best result. If you have a particular tool that works better through the dependency block as a composer global dependency, cool, that works fine. And those trade-offs are slightly different when you're dealing with other languages. So if you want to install, say, Sass as a Ruby gem, well, you can't put that in a composer file, but you can put that in a dependencies block. If you're running Ruby on Rails, then maybe you want that in your bundle file. Maybe you want that in dependencies. I don't know Ruby well enough to know which one you'd prefer, but we try to not make that decision for you. So I forgot to ask this before we move on. You work at Contextual Code. Tell us about Contextual Code.
So we have a small company, Florida-based, and most of our projects are easy publish, easy platform. And right now we are doing a lot of migrations from easy publishes, like the old easy platform is a new version of easy publish. And right now we are migrating a lot of easy publish projects to easy platform. And we use platform.sh as our primary hosting platform. So
have you ever run into an issue with someone talking about how easy it is to use easy platform on platform, and talking about easy platform enterprise on platform.sh enterprise, and anyone gotten confused there?
Nah. So nah, because we don't, to be honest, I don't think we don't have any enterprise projects, but I would assume that it's very similar to professional plans. And right now they changed, they are rebranding their company name. So maybe avoid the confusions like this is the main reason.
But Larry, I think we will suggest to our partners at Easy that we do rebrand it the Easy Platform Enterprise Edition.
SH.
Just for you, SH, exactly. Mathias, I think you had something to ask or say at one point.
Yeah, I was just sitting and listening, and I mean, the things you're talking about, I mean, it's this is really about both independence and freedom of choice when it comes to what to install, and do you want it as dependencies or do you want it as different things. And I think that's as with everything else in this world, there are times when you want one thing and times when you want the other. And apart from being, of course, a very American approach with both the independence and the freedom of choice and all of those things, I think
for
it's
a French
really
company.
good. Yeah, I think it's a really good thing to have the possibility to do both. And I'm sure there are people out there running platform.sh who would be really appalled by the thought of having PHP running on their environment.
Well, aside from the CLI, they don't have to. If you want to run a Go application or a Java application or Python or whatever is whatever you think is cool, we do run it. And we do now offer Lisp and Elixir, so we're the full hipster set.
Ooh.
So thank you, Serhey, for extending platform and writing about it extensively, and also all of the involvement you've shown in the platform.sh forum. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Mathias, do you want to introduce yourself a little bit more and say what you guys have done at Pixelant with extending platform.sh?
Yeah. So I work at Pixelant. We make mostly Type 3 websites. We do some other CMSs too, but mostly Type 3. And we've been working with that for a while. I mean, I started making websites almost 20 years ago. And I've been through all kinds of different hosting experiences. But I think what happens with introducing a new way of hosting your websites, there's always a time where you have to learn the specifics of the platform that you've chosen. And I mean, way back when, it was like, you uploaded a file and, would it come up when you typed in the URL? And you always have that thing, it works or it doesn't work. And the fun thing is that mostly it works. And it's only later, especially when you start with more advanced hosting and your own servers or your own solutions, things can run for a long time, and then you discover after a while that what you did originally was maybe a bad choice, or you thought something that was going to work.
That's the regret phase.
Yes, exactly. Or
for the days of static HTML websites.
Wonderful. And we've been running for a long time on VPSs and been really satisfied with that, but there's also challenges with VPSs, and one of them was cost as well. And then we found out about platform.sh, and we started moving sites over, and that went really well. So we had the uploading the site and it works, that kind of feeling. And what we experienced then after a time was that certain sites would go down and we didn't know why. And having worked with VPSs and all those kind of things, you learn a certain way of looking for what's wrong. Is there an error or a misconfiguration somewhere? So I actually sat down at one point and read through basically the whole documentation website for platform.sh and tried to find out what's the configuration options. What can we do? What's the special thing? And what we found out was there's working with a VPS is definitely not the same as working with platform.sh. It's much more encapsulated, and it's much more thinking in individual environments. And that's a totally different way of thinking, and not only for setting up the environment, but also for the developers. And what we found out was that some of the sites that we had on VPSs had been running well for a good while, didn't work that well on a sort of smaller environment, because the VPS can always throw lots of memory at a script you have, or it can do a lot of disk IO, and it's not a problem. But suddenly we had to think about these things and try to really stop wasting resources, which is a really good thing because it speeds up your script. And then I read in the documentation that you can actually find out something called memory hinting. Ooh, that sounds almost magical. And with memory hinting, you can tell platform.sh how much memory it's going to allocate to your PHP FPM processes. But then you have to run a shell script, and it gives you a long list of numbers, and it's not very visual, and you have to sort of find out what's the special thing about, where is your memory usage in relation to these settings. And so what I did was I sat down and I wrote a script that downloads the PHP logs for your environment, and it analyzes it, and it shows you colorful and nice graphs of how your scripts are working, both over time, but also over memory usage. For example, how many requests do you have with different memory footprints? And the idea there was to make it easier and much more visual for both the developers and, for that matter, the customer, to see what's actually going on the server, both over time, but also in the way of resource usage. So what we have now is a script that you can run, and that shows a number of different graphs, but especially one where you can pinpoint exactly the optimal memory hinting setting, for example, for your environment. And the cool thing with that is that you can actually then get more PHP processes mostly, because the default configuration gives out quite a lot of memory to each process. So we can reduce that by, well, 75% in some cases. And that means we can run more processes on the same install for the same cost, which is a really good way of optimizing. And you can also get back to your developers much sooner and say that, well, we have this memory peak, and we see that these requests are the ones that use that much memory. And please look at how your script is written and see if there is ways to improve it.
So for those watching, I've just pasted a link to Mathias's blog post, which he wrote on this topic about these scripts. And there you can see the pretty pictures, the graphs, and I'll also put that into the video text after the show. And Mathias, did this make an improvement? Did those sites stay online better?
Yes, yes, they did. And this is actually something we've started doing with every site that we launch on Platform.sh, that we let the site run a little bit to see the resource usage, and then we go through and analyze how the resource usage is in these graphs. And then we optimize the configuration so that we get the actually the least possible resources for the highest number of processes.
Yeah, we found this so. Go ahead, Serhey.
So I have a question about it, because we came across the same issue a lot of times, and we've been doing something similar. Basically, we've been using the average data for the last week to find out the optimal memory size for FPM process, but there is a potential issue with that, because it doesn't count the cases when a lot of heavy processes will start at the same time. So if you will downsize the average memory usage for PHP FPM process using some average data, but then some critical case will happen. For example, a lot of editors will run a heavy import. In that case, you might get some strange issues and errors. So you just need to keep in mind these kind of scenarios when you're doing.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
And take those risks.
There is a risk. You can scale it. Well, you can reduce the memory usage too much as well. And but what we see is that this is actually a very good way of working, because it makes you think about what kind of processes your scripts are running. And one of the things we had was some sites that were generating PDF files. And those PDF scripts were taking up a lot of resources. I mean, maybe 100 and something megabytes of memory just to generate a PDF file. And that's actually not the core activity of our web environment. So what we found out was the best thing for optimizing the site was to move the PDF generation into its own environment. And that's also something I've seen with the way a lot of people work with Typo 3, for example, that you have one environment running the web environment for the front-end website, and then you can run another environment that's optimized for the backend, for example. And also, when you mention imports, we also have product databases with tens of thousands of products that have to run and synchronize with different other external systems. And we have moved all of those into their own environment. And the cool thing about that is that we can also choose then how much resources do we want to use on those processes. If it's an import, we can choose to use very little resources on it, and therefore it takes longer, but that doesn't really matter. While on a web environment, you want it to be fast and snappy and do all of the user-facing things really quickly. So for us, it's helped us to see what is really necessary for a good end user experience on the website.
I think that's what I liked most about your script when you showed it off to us is, yes, it may help with determining optimal memory configuration, but it gives you so much more insight into what's going on beyond that in terms of CPU usage, memory usage, usage over time. It can tell you whether your problem is too many requests or too big of a request, and help you differentiate those. I was really impressed with just how much information you're able to glean simply from the logs and good visualization. And that, I think, speaks to just the data visualization in general is such a powerful way of analyzing a site. And
I'm sorry.
You're able to just suck that data out and do that. Yeah.
I'm sorry. I just want to mention Zabbix. I was showing that to Maria a few weeks ago.
Earlier, yeah.
And it's kind of similar tool. And the idea is that you take the metrics from platform.sh instance every 10, 15 seconds, and then you can visualize these metrics. And you can extend that. For example, you can take the metric could be how much RAM Solar service is using right now. And the idea is, that you frequently read the metrics, and then Zabbix will let you to build different graphs and check them over the time.
It's called Zabbix, you said?
Yeah, and
Double B.
I was going to write a blog post about that. It's still on my plate, but I'm not sure. Maybe I'll do that in a few weeks, hopefully.
Let us know when you do, because we'd be happy to retweet it. It sounds interesting.
Definitely.
All right. So both of you at this point are building tools on top of platform based on shell scripts and wrapping the CLI tool and other kind of baseline functionality like that. Maria, you're here to tell us about a completely new alternative that we're releasing today to make extending platform even easier in a totally different way. Tell us about these. What's the new hotness?
So yeah, here's the surprise. I thought for a second you were already going to open the box, but no, this is for me. Okay, so yeah, we're launching activity scripts, and these are custom snippets that you can do on JavaScript code that, well, you can add them as an integration, like it's integration add a script and add your custom script there, either through the CLI or the API, but I haven't got into what you can do with them, which is interacting with third-party services. Like, for example, you can edit the reports that you send to Slack, Twilio, trigger PagerDuty alerts, and all of this is based on the context that we get from the activities. So for example, you can do something when you push to a branch and then after the environment is deployed. And yeah, there is a set of available APIs, also underscore JavaScript library. And yeah, information about the projects and then in the context of the activity. And one thing that I think is the most exciting about it is that you can get the activities log for the activity script. So you can see what's happening in those and debug those and investigate. And yeah, I wanted to challenge you to, with these very small details, to think about things that you would love to try out with activity scripts. I can also provide some examples of things that we've done so far. If you're not inspired, that's okay. This is very new. So yeah, yeah.
So this lets you respond to stuff happening on platform, right? Okay.
Yep.
Cool. So Mathias, Serhey, is this?
I'm not
what can you
sure.
do with this?
I'm not sure I understand that correctly, but the thing is that now you have ability to listen for a custom hooks on platform.sh side. Is my vision correct, or
Close. You can't
Yeah.
define custom hooks, but there's a long list we have in the documentation as of yesterday of the things you can hook onto and then take arbitrary action.
I have one possibly fitting use case for this. So each time when you run a deployment on a master branch, it would be nice to run the same deployment on some, let's say, UAT branch and run acceptance tests. And only if all the acceptance tests are, if there are no failing acceptance tests, then run the same deployment on the master branch. I'm not sure if it's a perfect case for this.
I think at the moment you could, but it'd be the other way around. If you push to a UAT branch, kick off your integration tests or whatever tests you want to run, and if those pass, then you trigger a merge to master.
Yeah, kind of like a pipeline kind of flow rather than the other way around.
So I like that one.
Hey, Maria, could I ask a question at this point? Could you give some examples of the activities that these scripts can react to?
Yeah, so for example, I think I mentioned already environment push, like once you push something new to your environment, creating a branch, creating a backup, restoring from a backup, deleting those, anything related with creating variables so that the team can know, hey, there was a new variable created for this environment or this project. And yeah, also the cron finalized or your source operations triggered, and even things related to your domains. And yeah, I can link to the whole list. And I think one of the interesting parts also is that you get the results of the activity too, so that you can customize whatever you're doing depending on that result. So for example, in the case that Sergey was mentioning, you would do on that UTF-8 branch, you would do your custom script and say, if this is a success, then merge this into master. And if this fails, then send me a message here telling me, hey, you cannot continue, the pipeline is broken.
And how do you get your activity script code into your project?
Yeah, so you write it up, touch whatever .js, and then you either use the API or the CLI, which I think is easier. So you do, integrations, add script, and then --dash in the script. You point to the location in which you have it locally, and you can then update it or remove it as needed.
So this is a
These
script.
are project level scripts.
Project level scripts written in JavaScript that touch all of your environments equally. So you can control the whole project basically.
Yeah, keep an eye out on the whole thing.
What do you think, Mathias? What would you do with it?
Well, I think it sounds really cool, and I see it as a time saver also for maintenance. I mean that's really related to what Sergey said as well. But this possibility, I mean, looking at the people at my company that do maintenance tasks, getting these patch upgrades, making sure the software is secure and up to date, doing those automatically, and then you can ask, for a final human review before the site is merged. I think you should do that before you merge it into master, but
Usually,
at least you can automate a lot of these processes that are currently going on GitHub and other places. And you can actually, because that's what really makes me think of this as cool, is that you can actually test it in a platform.sh environment before you have to involve any humans in it. So that's a big time saver.
Definitely.
Yep.
And Maria, do we have
Okay.
examples that people can try out? And if so, what do they do?
Yeah, so right now, I think the most exciting example is one that is posted in our community site. And that one checks every time you push a master, it will report you the versions of the services and applications that you're running and let you know, hey, these are up to date or not. And it has 3 modes right now, like the warning, and I think alert, and the good one, like it's so clear, you're good. And yeah, if you're running like a deprecated PHP 7.1, you can make it red. And that way, you know, ideally, I think you at least want this for master, if not for your branches, so that nothing deprecated gets to master, but maybe it's there already. So this is a good reminder of, hey, there is something off here. Remember it, take a look. And you can also make it so that it gives you the newer versions, which is the example that we have that are available. Like, yeah, like you're using 7.1, but you can move to 7.2, 7.3, 7.4, and so on.
And for those still running out-of-date versions of PHP, please do update. There's a lot of new features and they're more secure.
And that normally applies to any language.
Yes. Very true.
Yeah, just stay safe out there.
We do
Internet
have
is a
a
dangerous place.
We do have a reference activity script as well in our documentation, and I think that's worth mentioning. It's really well annotated, and it posts to Slack basically on any activity that you want to fire on, and it can post a message. So that's especially nice because when you read it, you'll find that there is an Easter egg that's a call out to Deploy Friday.
Yes.
Which you are welcome to put in your own scripts as well, or not. It's up to you. You know, we encourage being a little bit playful.
Mm-hmm.
So, Larry, you mentioned debugging activity scripts at one point. Can you go a little bit more into that? Because one of the weird things about like sending a file off to some cloud to run on your behalf during activities is like, how do you know if it's working right, and how do you debug it, and how do you get the feedback that's always necessary when writing code about what your code's doing in its runtime environment?
Yeah, so that actually ties into a couple of places in platform. So we have these activities that trigger and you could hook onto. Those also generate an activity log, and you can analyze that activity log, some of them through the UI, some of them through the CLI. So there's a command you can run to say, for this integration, what is the last log entry, or what are the most recent log entries? And any output from the script itself that you're running, your activity script, is included in that output. So it's essentially print-based debugging, but you can do that now for any script you want to run. And you can also, if you have, the same output is used for, say, GitHub integration or GitLab integration. So if there's something weird happening with your GitHub integration, you can now have the ability to look into that yourself and see, oh, GitHub's down again, or this other issue happened on the GitHub side. And so there's more information available there. When I was developing some of our sample activity scripts, I was doing essentially that. You can run an activity script on any activity. So I had a test project where I had a script I would install, run a redeploy on it, which is a nice fast action, and then just look at the log output from that script. It's just hit up, enter in my console or in my command line, and I could see what happened, what was my JavaScript error, oh, it was that one again, because of course I make that mistake. Dump out values, just all your standard debugging by print statement tools that every developer is intimately familiar with at this point. And that allowed me to just iterate very quickly on a very fast activity. And then I can take that script and assign it to any activity I want. So I can have a script that runs on every activity, or one that only runs on build, or only on deploy, or only on title has changed, and so forth. So I can develop it independent of whatever activity it's going to run on, mostly. So for example, the Slack notification script we have, you can configure that. It'll tell you what happened. You can configure it to run just on deploys to master, or just on deploys to any branch, or just on anything that happens on master, or just pushes and builds on master or the integration branch, and so on. And the script doesn't have to change for that. So that makes it easy to write at least most of a script without having to, all right, I need to actually change something. I need to actually change my DNS setting in order to trigger that event so I can test my DNS setting responding script. You don't need to play with your DNS and break that as much. So that was the thing that delayed the launch of this feature for a while, was making sure we had that ability in there, because a program you can't debug doesn't exist. So, we needed that feature in place before we could launch it. So it's in place now. Now we can launch it.
What are some of the limitations of activity scripts? What can't you do?
Right now, I think the biggest limitation is that all of the activities that you can hook onto are thing has happened. So you can hook into a project has just been built, it's just been deployed, an environment has just been created, an environment has just been deleted. One of the things we're looking at doing in the future, and I'm not putting a timeline on this, is adding a thing is about to happen. Project is about to be built. Project is about to be deployed. Branch is about to be deleted. And then offer a way
to... about to go down.
Site's about to go down. Upsize.
And then, you take an action in response to that, including blocking it. So you conceivably could do something like, oh, you're about to rebuild on the master branch, but one of your containers is running an old deprecated version. We're just not going to let you deploy. We don't have that built into platform, but you could certainly build it in yourself to say, hey, you're not allowed to deploy with an old version of PHP. You have to update first.
Or you're only allowed to deploy on Friday.
You're welcome to install that script yourself if you are so inclined. So that's the next step we see for activity scripts, is offering that kind of blocking.
Yeah, would love to hear any feedback and ideas that you and the people watching this have about this. Like, the community forum is the perfect place for that. So
yeah, we do have a community forum section, community.platform.sh, that has some ideas for scripts already in it. And we want customers to share their ideas there. And if you have a script that, hey, this is a thing that works for me, cool. Post it there, provide some documentation, share it around, let people iterate on it, and let's see what you come up with. This is, we very specifically are making this with an open-ended, I don't know what you're going to do with it. What you tell us.
Yeah, some other things that might be lacking right now is the ability to edit those scripts in the UI, and we might be looking into that in the future too, so that you can say, get me the script, do it again. And that way you can edit those faster, see the latest changes. And yeah, we'd just love to hear what you think. So
that would have been a cool thing, though. I mean, I just thought, well, connect it to an API so you can have a button or add your own buttons for your own action scripts in the UI, so that even non-developers can go in and press the try this button.
Yeah, kind of plug in sort of style. We'll see.
Some of that starts to overlap there with source operations, which is a different extension point that we haven't talked about yet. Source operations are a feature. You can put a script into your app YAML file, and then you manually trigger those source operations through an API call or a CLI command, but that has access to the full source code. So the canonical example here is on an update branch, you trigger a source operation that starts with a complete checkout of your code base. You run composer install or composer update, git commit, and then that redeploys that environment with your updated code. So you have a branch that is always showing your code if you ran composer update on it.
Automatic
and you can test that.
updates of your code.
Yes.
That's the headline. Automatic updates of your code.
And then you like it? Cool. Hit the merge button and it goes to production. If for some reason that breaks, well, you don't automatically update production. That's bad. You just automatically update a preparation branch for it. And that'll work just as well for NPM or bundler or yarn if you're still using that.
Dependencies.
Whatever your dependency toolchain is.
Yeah, and this is really particularly useful to people who have what we call fleets of sites, which includes both contextual code and I want to say Resultify, but
Pixelant.
Pixelant.
Yeah.
So a question to both of you, Serhey, you can go first. How many sites do you have on platform right now?
I guess it's about 30, maybe 35.
Okay, and Mathias, how about you guys?
Oh, that's a difficult question to answer. We've got 50 projects, but then we run a lot of multi-sites. So we're on a couple of hundred, probably, possibly more.
Fantastic. And I have a question, another question for both of you, because you are live on the air with Maria, who is a product manager at Platform.sh. And if anybody has the power to get something done at Platform.sh, it's Maria. So here's your chance. If you have one feature request that you've always really wanted, the number one of your life that would just make you so happy, what would it be?
Now I need to spend a few hours to find out.
I know, this is a heartfelt,
one.
I have one.
Yeah, go for it.
And I think a lot of other people have that too, but the reverse proxy cache, it would be so cool to be able to clear that without having to redeploy. And even maybe, clear only tags or specific URL. Wow.
But you can do that with Varnish, right?
Yeah, but it's another thing to manage. This is just built in. So
context there, Platform.sh uses Nginx as its web server and router for incoming requests, and it's got a built-in HTTP cache, which you can configure in your .platform.app YAML file, and Mathias'
in your routes.yaml file.
In your routes.yaml file, but also in the location in your application, right?
That's configuring the headers that your application sends for static files. The actual caching itself happens at the router layer in the routes YAML file.
No wonder it never works when I do it.
So you're watching Rob learn here on the fly, folks.
So Mathias's request is, how could you clear that cache? And I think that's a great feature request. And I'm curious, maybe it's even possible already with something we never thought of, and maybe you can do it with an activity script. Who knows?
Sorry, and I have my feature request.
Go for it.
So I would like to be able precisely specify amount of resources per each service and worker. Because right now there are some predefined sizes like small, medium, large, and so on. But I would like to say that for this service, I want to have X amount of CPU and Z amount of RAM.
Maria, are we going to be able to make Serhey happy in the future?
Possibly, yes. And I have a follow-up question, which is, how often do you find yourself changing from S to M and the sizes for the general application?
So I was doing that this morning, basically. I was, for one of our new projects, I was trying to find the optimal sizes. We have 8 services there, a few workers, and I was playing with that.
Yeah, so if we were to find the optimal size for you, that would be also good.
It's so you don't. It's something which is impossible to do because, for example, we need to have a very huge Redis cache on the instance. But how do you know that we will need to have that huge Redis service?
Yeah, you probably know better than us, but yeah, I was just wondering.
Yeah, and yeah, it's something which is almost impossible to achieve. I mean, for example, we will have a newsletter and we will need to add some resources to Solr. You cannot make that decision based on some statistical data. Yeah. So yeah, having the manual ability to precisely specify resources per each service, that would be probably the feature request.
Thank you.
Stay tuned.
Yeah, I've also noted down the cache one. So.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, don't worry.
Great. Well, we're coming up to the end of the hour. There are no questions from the audience, which just means we did a great job of answering all the questions, of course. But if you have questions,
you answered everything.
If you have questions later in the future and we're no longer broadcasting live, then leave a comment on this video. We look at the comments, we'll look at those questions, and also subscribe to our channel so you can see notifications about other videos that we're publishing and other episodes of Deploy Friday. So I want to thank all of our guests. It was really fun talking about what you've done to extend Platform.sh and also hearing about the new activity scripts feature that we've launched. And I ask everybody to come back next week on Friday for the next episode. All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Take care.
And we're done. Yay.
Woo!
And Maria
Are we actually done?